Hey everybody, I'm back with our painting project for step number 3. And I may break this up into a few more steps. I'm realizing that maybe smaller bites are better than my longer videos. There's a lot to pack in at the beginning. I'm gonna go through some steps today. What we're gonna talk about is how to add some contrast to start to get the light and dark to come out and show a bit more form. All right, so let's get right into it here. So last time we talked, I made a mess. What I've done is gone back a little bit, and you notice the gloves, I smoothed them out a little bit. Just one more layer lightly over the top really can smooth out areas. The other thing is that you'll notice a few of these areas, you see some pencil marks. I've actually gone back and drawn in some of the lines that were there originally just so I could see them better. No rules here, okay? So we are working with watercolor paint, but don't feel like you can't use a pencil again. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add some contrast. And so I've mixed up a few colors. One color that I started with was just simply taking a green because I want to work with the shadows underneath the glove and underneath the shell. And I've mixed in some of this green and then added in some of the crimson. So I get more, you'll notice that it'll turn more almost violet, kind of a gray violet. So this is going to be good for bringing in, and again, always test it out a little bit. You know, I can test it here. Definitely looks like when I paint it on here, it looks like a shadow of that green. So that's what we're looking for. And then in the still life, I'll be looking at some of those areas underneath the glove that I'll start to paint in. So I'm just going to kind of lightly add in a little bit of this contrast so I can start to see some of the details come out. And again, you know, work minimally to begin with. You can always make things go darker. Sometimes it's harder to get things back to light, but I'll also talk about that a little bit today too. Okay, so I'm just looking for areas where I could definitely see some contrast from the glove onto the green of the backdrop. And I'm just going to layer in some of that paint. So I'll do this fast motion so you can see. Okay, so that's a little bit of a start. So you'll notice that the last step there, I added some water first and then dropped the green into it because that shadow underneath the shell is a little bit blurry. So, you know, it's still a little bit loose. I just want to get some contrast in here. The next thing I'm going to do, what I did was I mixed up some of that Prussian blue here. Okay, I mixed that into here. I added a little bit, I'm sorry, the cobalt blue, and then the Prussian blue I added into here. And then I used just a little bit of black. Now, I recommend if you're going to use black, always add it into a color, right? Sometimes black has too much contrast against other sort of objects. So here what I'm going to do is just look for the shadows that are casting from the shell onto the glove that are definitely the darkest. I'm just going to put in a little bit of that line work. And then I've got a little bit lighter blue mixed up, a little bit lighter blue here that I mixed up, and I'll do that into some of the shadow work. So I'm just going to take this really dark blue and speed up a bit so you can see, but I'm just going to bring in some of the contrast that I see from the shell to the glove. Okay, so now I've got that darkness in. I'm going to go and I took the Prussian blue and I've added this in here. Sorry, I keep saying the wrong blue. Cobalt blue. And then down here, I've got some sienna. It's a little bit of a complement. It's an orangey brown. I'm going to add this into it. So again, it's going to darken it a bit. And that's going to give me a color that I feel like is going to be pretty good into some of those areas where it's shadowed on the glove. So we'll mix this here so we can see, maybe lighten it up just a little bit. Something like that looks pretty good. Maybe just a touch of white so it's not super contrasty, but just has a little bit of that pop. All right, that looks pretty good. So here what I'm going to do is I actually drew in some of the areas where I saw some of the folds and where there's definitely some shadows hidden. So I'm just going to go and paint those in. Okay, so you can see I've got some more values in the glove now, and it's really starting to become more three-dimensional. So in doing this process, you're kind of moving a bit from, painting large swatches, kind of like painting the fence, right? Where you're just trying to cover area. In this case, you really have to think about the direction of the mark and how it can become linear, right? So you'll see that I added a lot of these areas that are filling in shapes, but they're also changing direction. They're becoming more linear, and they're adding more three-dimensionality to the composition. So this process of going in for step 3 is going to be adding contrast. Where can you start to look for light and shadow that is definitely going to help show the differences between subtle areas of each object? Where is it darker? Where is it lighter? And then also reinforcing some of the colors as you go through. So what I would do to continue this, I could totally just work into the glove and finish it, which I'm also tempted to do sometimes. But I'm actually going to kind of this level of detail so far, which is not there yet. It's halfway there. I'm going to bring to the other objects. So I'm going to add some contrast in the shell. I'm going to add some contrast in the vessel here, and then we can take a look again, and I can point out what I've done. Okay, so I jumped forward a bit. I wanted to just point out a few things. So I mixed up some pretty dark red. What I did was I used the crimson here, okay, and then I added a little bit of black to it, and that just tones it down enough to make this very, very dark color for the inside of the liquid. And then you can see that I'm very carefully painted it in to really increase the contrast. We can clearly see the shell against this now very strongly. Also added some line work down below with some of the dark green, okay, in the vessel here, and then also some of the dark violet that I mixed up. And one thing you can notice about this, and I do want you guys to really remember that what we're doing is we're observing and we're noticing, and what we notice, we got to try to put into action, okay? So I noticed that the light areas are starting to become a lot brighter because I've added the contrast of the darker color, right? So our eye is going to read the whole composition. It's going to read the range from light to dark. And your areas that are light are going to look lighter if the dark areas are darker, right? So we have to add that contrast to sort of pull out form, right? It helps to increase the way that we understand the shape. But then it also does something like this, where this suddenly starts to take on a whole lot more brightness. Same with the reflections that I've added into some of these things. So I may have to tone them down a little bit more compared to my still life, but it's a really good start to add some depth to this. So the last thing I'll do is add a bit more contrast to the shell, and that'll pretty much finish out step 3. The consecutive steps are going to be refining, 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 right? So imagine carving a block of ice into a sculpture. First, you're going to just knock away big pieces that you don't need anymore. Next, you're going to go in and kind of shape and refine to the general form. That's what we've done to the glove. We've got the general form of the glove. And then it comes into the details, if you think about refining the edges and the textures and things like that, that's where we'll really allow this to really have a lot of depth and realism to it. So I'm going to kind of go over step 4 and 5 in next videos, but I'm going to finish this up by adding some contrast to the shell so you can see where that's gone from start to finish, and we'll do a little side-by-side comparison. Okay, well, I added a bit more contrast to the shell. So you can see that down below here, I've added a bit more darker tones, also up near the top and also in the interior of the shell. So a couple of different things I did. Essentially what I needed down here was a shadow color from the shell. And the shell is made up of a bunch of different kind of sienna orangey colors and blue colors. So basically that's what I did. I just grabbed some of the cobalt and some of the sienna and mix those up, and you end up getting this kind of nice gray color if you balance out the two values kind of back and forth. And this was a good color for me to use to bring in. Now I watered it down quite a bit, and that will help too, just to give an even kind of wash. So what I'm doing is just kind of giving a wash of the color in those areas. And then also I kind of went back and dropped in a little bit dots of sienna just to kind of increase the texture a little bit, because I don't want that texture to go away that I generated. So I worked back and forth there. Then in the interior, I used a little bit of the crimson, a little bit of the black, and also a little bit of the sienna to kind of make this muted, grayed out interior. So the interior of the shell has a little bit of that violet and kind of umbery kind of color coming through. So that's what I've done there. And this kind of completes the third step, which is try to add contrast. So from the before and after, you can see that blocked in the colors in the second step. And in the third step, what I'm really working on here is, just trying to give some form, add contrast to look at some of the shadows. And again, we're moving from kind of painting the walls and painting the fence, trying to get those big swatches of color in, to areas that are more subtle and controlling the marks and thinking about them in a linear fashion. So that's it for step 3. I'll move on to step 4 soon. Just wanted to thank you for stopping in again, and I'll see you all later. Take care.